Hi, Luke. Thanks for taking the time with GTM Expertise. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Ben. Good to be here.
No worries at all. So you're our first Australian interviewee, so I'm very proud to have you on GTM Expertise to talk about early stage. Before we get into that, though, I'd really like to get a bit more of a background on you, where you kind of journey came, and but also like what are you up to now and who are you helping?
Yeah, thanks, Ben. And apologies in advance for it's all downhill from here now that you've had your first Aussies. I've been growing businesses with digital for 20 years. Started off as a media buyer, worked my way up the agency food chain, in Singapore, joined the creative services team at Google, and basically after Google had my first sort of startup pitch about, I don't know, 12, 13 years ago, started a consultancy working with startups down here in Melbourne, Australia, and got two customers like, wow, I know what I'm doing. But there was no ecosystem back then and ran out of money. And so got a job at Facebook and helped launch Instagram advertising product in Australia. But I've always had that startup itch. And so as the startup world has grown, I've rubber banded back in and back out and been full time consulting for about 10 years on and off with startups and probably full time now for about 5 or 6 years. And so, love it. Love that chaotic founder energy, disbelief, betting against the odds. And I think being someone who's quite curious and sort of multi hyphenate, I do a lot of things. I like the fact that in early stage, you can get away with doing a lot of things before you go into your compartments corporate brand marketing land. So it keeps me honest right now, working on, I'd say, 5 or 6 clients, a little too much, but I know it gets quiet around the Christmas period, loading up.
Of course, yeah.
Co-founded something with a business partner, and sitting on another opportunity, sort of adjacent to this stuff that may take off in the new year. So yeah, keeping very busy, and just to keep me even more honest, I've got twin toddlers who are 2.5 years old. So I am not abundant in spare time.
You're all in like multiple times by the sounds of it. That's a great intro. Thank you, Luke. You know, parallels to me in terms of kind of moved out of that corporate world, and we all do it for different reasons. Uh, Having a salary coming in every month and kind of turning up to work and knowing that security's there, and you kind of leaving that. I think for a lot of startup founders, which is really who we're targeting in with this kind of expertise here, leaving that kind of realm and going into the startup world. If it's your first time doing it, why would you do it? And what can you tell these people about what it's like?
Yeah, it's definitely less secure for sure. I do think if you learn how to balance, the wins and mitigate the losses, you really can make it work because I think the flip of this, and I think the market's going this way too, is if you are made redundant, which in tech is a very real reality, no matter what sort of role you're in, it can be
Yep.
months before you find another role. Whereas my last sort of job was at an ASX 500 leading their social impact program. Amazing opportunity. But I've been consulting before then and then, got made redundant and I just pick up where I left off. And I love once you
Right.
develop that hunting skill and learning how to cultivate referrals, work your super referrers, people get a sense of what you can and can't do. You can call them up and go, what do you got? And that's really fun. So if someone's considering it, the flexibility and sort of being able to eat what you kill, it's a very satisfying feeling. But I will say it's not cut out for everyone. Like I meet a lot of, say, senior
Mhm.
professionals working with startups is cool. I'd like to do that. And I actually have no idea how chaotic, how underfunded they are, how they're trying to do everything on the smell of an oily rag, champagne tastes, beer budgets. There's lots of truisms that apply to startups that once they get their hands dirty, it's not as fun as it might look like on the outside.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
can really enjoy it as well, and clearly I have to be doing it for so long.
Yeah, and I think you're hitting on loads of things there. I think the potential naivety to stepping into something like that without the risk tolerance in your brain that things will be like a roller coaster, and I think the highs are possibly higher than corporate life, but the lows are definitely probably lower than corporate life, and so you've got to be comfortable with that. And especially like self, you've got a family, you've got other things, you have to be comfortable with that. But for me, what struck and when I look back at that too, is it's a whole new world when you come out of corporate. Like corporate, you're kind of put in this like kind of lane, right? And you're in a pretty tight vertical, and then you know that really well, and you're eating so much information every day still, but in a very narrow space. And suddenly you come out of that, and you look out the whole world is a world of opportunity. It's a lot harder to come across, and you have to use different skills. But I think those skills that you use then in, say, a growth or sales role in a startup are exactly the same skills you need to go and find those next gigs. Is that how you view it?
Yeah, I think so. And I used to think earlier on that perhaps all the own business stuff, all the own freelancer stuff might be too big a blemish now on the resume. But I've been on the other side, recruiting for roles as well. And if someone's got the gumption and resilience to back themselves to be able to solve those problems when there is that much on the line, I see it as a tall striking point. And there was something you said, Ben, about that staying in the lane, and I had the benefit of working at two tech companies and with some senior sort of people that came into those companies and couldn't perform, but then have later left those same companies in more entrepreneurial style roles, either as a GM or a
Mm,
managing director, or a smaller ad tech, and absolutely killed it. Like, doing far better than they ever would within that system. And I think, uh, you know, those big companies are often looked touted as the be all end all. When I look at the other side of the fence and value that more highly. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it sounds like it's about finding where you can really add value, and I think there's a sense in startups for me, what I've seen and what I've worked in, that that generalist is another term that might, it has different meanings too. But I think a lot of things maybe not quite as deep, but also you're chopping and changing extremely quickly. And I think a personality that likes that and works in that, whether you've founded the startup or you're part of a founding team, is extremely valuable. But do you resonate with that in yourself as a personality, and therefore you think that that's why you like that? You have this chopping and changing, very quick sort of context switching and that kind of thing, or was there something else?
No, you've hit the nail on the head. I've marinated on this a lot and done a lot of soul searching and gone, why does this resonate with me a lot? I think one thing you mentioned was the learning and switching between many things and maybe not going as deep. My build on that is, you also have to learn new ways to leverage, because to sort of succeed in growth within a startup, you are looking for ways to do more with less. And so you have to be pretty creative and thrifty and definitely bend the rules a lot, which you can't get away with at bigger companies. And I think that
Yeah, right.
learn by doing and learn as you apply it and learn by going. And we've gone a bit into this conversation without mentioning the words AI, but I think one thing that has opened up is you can get deep into certain subject areas effectively if you're willing to do the work. And one founder that I swap notes with all the time, he has gone deep on product-led growth, SEO,
Hmm.
and using agents to apply it. And he's not SEO background, but the outsized returns he's getting and the charts he's sharing with me, I've never
Right.
seen anything like it. And I think you just can't do that if you're not in a smaller company, because there's guardrails and compartments, there's experts that know more than you. And I think we were joking out about it before the call, like, part of it is believing that you can do it, even if, there's a bit of naivety there as well, isn't there?
Absolutely, absolutely. And bags of that, I think the right kind of naivety, I suppose. I mean, we've seen plenty of startups start, and you can kind of face palm a little bit, maybe, but that's great. I mean, there's going to be lots of failures. I think that's the other sort of rich learning that we're trying to provide as GTM expertise, is that the majority actually fail at some point, right? And that's the reality that you need to step into as a startup founder. And hearing the failures is not a negative thing, right? It's a learning opportunity for everyone, and if you've got the right kind of character, you'll bounce onto the next one. You'll take all of that with you, and off you go. I suppose you still need plenty of naivety or structured belief or whatever you want to call it to get into this. But like, let me ask you now, because you mentioned AI, and I think one of the you talked about all the positives there. One of the things that we see at the moment with startup founders, and if you're a technical startup founder, you start your journey, you've built some product, whatever, but all you're seeing now is what you think is noise and signal, but it's very hard to differentiate too. And it's like a tsunami of information coming at you, and every day you get something that will probably give you a negative impression that your startup has a chance of success, because ChatGPT is just like throwing out another solution that completely blows away half of your product or whatever it is that the news gives you. How do you kind of put the blinkers on? How do you kind of lock out that noise, pick out the signal that you need, but like get on with what you're doing, and kind of move forward?
Yeah, I think what I've managed to cultivate over time and sort of have the added benefit of having worked in big brand world as well and with sort of big companies is a sense of what works over time and what great looks like. Like having an agency background, you have a very strong
Right.
sense of, this is what excellent work looks like. And you don't necessarily need that to be successful as a startup, but you need enough of that to be able to separate the signal from the noise, as you're saying. And so I've spoken to founders where they've started a strategy where it was using influencers, and we reviewed the data, and it was YouTube's with these influencers in the niche they were in, and they started getting sort of really good results, like outsized view counts for what they were doing for the budget, and then stopped. And I came back to this 18 months, 24 months down the road. I said, "Why'd you stop?" And they said, "It wasn't working." I'm like, "You did 4 influencer videos and they were improving each one, and then you stopped." And, "Oh, yeah,
Right.
we took it." And I think someone who is perhaps more skilled or has more knowledge in this area knows you need consistency, you need things to take time, but at the same time, if things are improving execution on execution over a short enough timeline, that's a pretty good signal that you can lean in and start
Mm,
going. And you may
mm.
10x it then, and it doesn't work, but at least you've followed the thread or the vein to exhaustion and understood why or why not that channel doesn't work instead of this impulsive gut call. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the tendency there too is to kind of read the maybe the signal down the line. Like that might be working by the metrics, but they're also under pressure, right? They're under pressure by whether it's their investors themselves, if bootstrapped, whatever it might be. And the translational metric to that is, am I getting new users to the platform? And if I am, are they continuing to use it? Am I getting revenue? Um, how do you see those pressures that startup founders get around those experiments? Like you mentioned, that's kind of an experiment, right? You've got to do a lot of experiments at once, and you've got
Yes.
to kind of place your bets on some of those. How do you balance that with trying to provide what your startup needs in terms of traction and metrics and potentially revenue? That's a lot to juggle, and that's a big decision point for us, a founder, to decide where to place.
Yeah, yeah, and I don't think there's uh, a perfect way to do this. It's a messy process, and I think you're balancing different plates at once. But one thing that I guess being early stage helps is that you're not relying on experts in any single area, and so while I'd say the majority of my background would be sort of marketing, digital marketing, I am totally fine jumping in the sales room as well. And so, shadowing calls, tag teaming calls. And I think one of the benefits startups have is they can ebb and flow into the things that are needed at time rather quickly. And it's a team effort. And so the best teams I've worked with, the founder's not adverse to jumping in and doing a deck or jumping in the tools and fixing some code, and vice versa with the people around them. And so I quite enjoy that, and I see that as advantageous. The pressure's enormous. Like, as we know, most fail. And I think accepting that and just, okay, but we're going to leave no stone unturned here. And it won't be from lack of trying. And so while I sort of get my hackles up at the word pivot because it has some negative connotations, I'd challenge it and say, there's always at least 5 or 10 more moves you can make. It's just a matter of maybe sleeping on it, going for a walk, having a huddle. Yeah, there's always more plays. And I think to talk to go to market, that's why it's so fun, because the levers you pull in this early stage trying to figure out that growth formula are immense, like, landing pages, product, sales pattern, marketing, cadence, like sequence. There's so many
Mm,
things you can pull and play with that, yeah, it's overwhelming, but also intoxicating when you get the formula right.
absolutely. And I think there's a feeling there. You mentioned pivot, or just you've got all these things and you're trying, some aren't working, that you can get quite maybe down on the fact that it hasn't worked, but like the market doesn't care. The market's not seeing that because it didn't work, so they didn't see it anyway. What they will see is the one that really does come true, and I think that's key. But you also mentioned something about sort of getting out of the blocks. Today there are I would view it's easier than ever to start a business or start a company or start an idea and get to 0 to 1 really quickly. Now you've got a huge number of companies out there that are trying to get traction. There's not enough business in the world for all of those companies. And, you've just got this plethora of what I would look at as quite thin value props today, and perhaps not that defensible. So, how would you view getting traction in those spaces when really you've got you're so niche, or like you've got such thin areas to kind of play in because you've carved yourself a great niche in many ways, right? But it also can easily be gobbled up
Mm.
in 6 months' time. Before you'd had a defensibility the last years, and you'd be like, "Don't worry about it. We'll figure out where we are in 24 months." 24 months is like
Eons
so
away.
far ahead these days. How do you like help coach a founder on that? How do you act in your role in that way?
Yeah, the time horizon, it can be terrifying, but I think one thing that can really help here is just the idea of generating some momentum and center of gravity around what you're doing. I think people in the early days aren't buying from a brand. And this is one of the things I sort of coach founders through as well. That a brand is something that has a reputation, a following, and a large cohort of belief behind it. In the early days,
Mm,
the brand is your personal brand. It's your reputation of how the interactions, or whether you say what you do on a sales call, they can follow through and deliver. And then you sort of get to this growth, go to marketing, figure it out each stage. And then only later you're looking at things like performance marketing and brand marketing. And most startups don't get there. And so I think um, how to differentiate is, well, just lean into the fact that you're a bit weird. You've built personal relationships. They're following you on LinkedIn because, sure, your product's okay, but they kind of like how goofy you are. Um, Lean into your shtick and make it weird. There's a lot of I would say top tier startup thought leaders that say distribution is your moat, and I think that there's definitely some truth to that, because while there isn't enough room for all market wise, there also isn't enough room for all attention wise. Like, share of attention is so hard to come by and remaining
yeah,
memorable.
yeah,
You sort of lean into
yeah.
that, that's going to help you differentiate rather than there's products that could be superior to yours but aren't memorable.
That leans into the human side of being a founder, right? Like you mentioned, pick a peculiarity or something that's pretty unique for you, and double down, triple down on that, because that's going to get you the cut through. Oh, by the way, we have a product which does, because digitally, sort of the front door, if you like, with a lot of products these days is kind of similar, right? It's kind of hard to. They're so well created right now. Like a website's not a hurdle anymore, right? And so you just got this front door. Everything looks shiny and great and wonderful, but like, okay, so let's put all that aside. What's real about this? And I think that's the human side of being a founder that I think people might forget, and especially perhaps the technical founder who might not be that confident in getting up on stage and kind of throwing themselves out there and putting their personality out there. But that's required, I think. And I think, especially in those early days, those founder led conversations are pivotal, right?
Yeah, I'll give a specific example about a founder I'm working with at the moment. His name's Gab. He's a runs a agent builder called Tooth Fairy AI that is very focuses on sovereign security and using all the models, the open source models, in a way that's quite constructive, innovative. But he is definitely sort of developer background by heart, and is blessed by being Italian. So English isn't his first language either. Even in the time I've known him, really pushed into building the personality. He shared his story in a book. He posts on LinkedIn, not because he loves it or because it comes to him naturally, but because he realizes this is part of the game. And to that he's credited, he's bootstrapped it and got over 200 customers thus far. And now sort of talking about the investment side of things, I think part of it is the understanding that, in 2025 and moving into 2026, part of the game, is building those early followers and people around you. And they want to buy more than just a transactional thing. There's trust and sort of knowledge and personality that goes into it as well.
Yeah, and I think those people who are buying first, the traditional early adopters, I suppose, they're looking for more than just a salesperson to sell them a tool, right? Like this is not that kind of transaction. I think it can be quite tempting to, as well, post founder led sales to hire a salesperson, right? And to have that, even then, I think that kind of carbon copy approach of the founder to your first sales hire or whatever it is you're doing in that area, they still have to replicate that kind of like access to all areas, almost like part of the startup where we're really transparent. We'll tell you more about it. We're not just providing your product, but we're learning as well in this space because that's the reason we're early stage. It's never been done before, or at least in this way. And so those kind of people are required. That isn't a sales role, right? Like if you were a salesperson at a corporate and you have a crack at startup, you rock up and you're like, so what are we selling? Like, what are those people going to find? Because I think that's a really fun one to touch on. You must have seen that before. And how do you explain that to someone who's in corporate who's thinking, I can sell, I've sold loads of SaaS products before. I'm I've got a good network, I've got a good rapport with folks. How different is corporate sales to startup sales?
It's so different, Ben. I've seen it a lot, and those first say corporate sales hires or corporate marketing hires, even, and they just flame out, and it's a strike on the record of the founder's hiring profile. I think some obvious differences. There's no guardrails, there's no decks, there's no polish, there's no process, and that can be like a fish out of water for most sort of corporate exiters going into that world. It isn't impossible to solve for, though. And so if you approach it with a sense of humility, a sense of curiosity, one of the first startups I worked with 12 or 13 years ago was like a crowdfunding platform similar to Kickstarter, but local to Australia, called
Mm.
Possible. And the
Yep.
founder was like shopping me around in meetings saying, oh, this guy's from Google. Yeah, I'm like, just don't. No one cares. Like, we're trying to help these indie projects get off the ground and raise these sort of cool, Kickstarter style projects. We don't need to flash
Yeah.
that. I think it doesn't help at
Yeah.
all. The humility and just being able to read the room and meet them where they're at goes a long way. And I think probably another thing that's different with corporates versus startups. Yeah, in corporate as a salesperson, you can get away with talking about yourselves a lot, because they're coming to you. You've got some prestige. There's a lot of clout, when you're selling cutting edge enterprise tech or solutions. That is not the case as a startup guy for sales. And so,
Yeah.
20% talking, 80% listening. Like if you can, it's hard to hit that all the time, but you really do want to you're basically
Sure.
trying to elicit as much information out of them as possible so you can sort of jerry rig your solution into that, because it's never going to be a perfect fit.
Yeah, absolutely. And we found Mark and I's background being sort of engineering led and more sales engineering, pre-sales. We focus a lot where there's a complex sale, for example, in that way. But you definitely, you don't normally have that resource with you, right? You don't have the luxury of going in with two people and have a sales person and a sales
Yeah,
engineer on a
yeah, yeah,
startup.
yeah.
You're it, right? You're it. So that exactly what you mentioned there about listening, finding the kind of biggest pains. That should be fairly straightforward for a salesperson, but also change your hat again. Now you're kind of solution engineering, trying to figure out, all right, well, we have like two of these modules, which I think if we maybe even rename them, we could probably sort of position that quite well in real time, right? And then maybe even demo it, right? And then think about potentially committing features that loosely might be on the roadmap in the there's so many skills, and you've got to do that in real time, because you might not get another meeting, right? Like that's the other thing. In a corporate, like you mentioned, you have all this clout. You can get a meeting kind of any time, and you have a budget to go and take them to wherever you like. If the meeting's not in the office, then something else will work. But like, you don't have that luxury as a startup. You might have 15 minutes in the lobby because you happen to be there, right? And you've got that kind of get that value out of it. I love that, by the way, and I find that quite exhilarating. But that's not for everyone either, is it?
No, not at all. And yeah, I love the analogy of sort of sales guy and solutions engineer. I think to the hybridized skill set, you definitely need to bone up in the areas you're weak in, whether it's product or dev or maybe you don't understand marketing as well as you could because you sort of have to blend across a lot of areas. And yeah, the example I was thinking of with another startup, like yeah, you could promise something like, yeah, we can connect into the API, but actually, it's a back end sort of database migration that's required. And you're like, oh, God, that's different. And,
Yeah, yeah,
it can get
yeah.
messy really fast. And yeah, there's a reason why solutions engineers are
You
very
can.
expensive hires because they don't paint people into holes. But
Yeah,
that's part of the fun as well. And yeah,
that's awesome. To kind of wrap up a bit, we were at we were in an event last week, and it was called a growth summit, right? And I think that's a really kind of appropriate word in a lot of ways for a lot of things you do in a startup. It's quite a broad, and the audience was broad naturally because lots of people are interested in growth, funnily enough. But like, what is growth mean to you, and if because there's a lot of roles in there, and I'm thinking of how founders now are thinking about their next hire if they've got the funding to do this, and they're thinking right head of growth, right? You see that role a lot. What does that mean, and what are these founders looking for in people like?
yeah, obviously there's different takes on this, but I sort of see sales and marketing world as it stands today. I'd probably even put customer success post purchase for early stage in there as well. But it's all blending. It's all blending together. At that stage, you can't have a pure salesperson because they need to understand how to scale to a larger audience and start converting. And you can't have a pure marketing person because they've got to ask uncomfortable questions at some point and close even if it's customer discovery. And so that blend and that head of growth person definitely speaks that language and skews one way or another. But a good example in early stage, like you will design a funnel. It'll be good enough to get things through or, whip up a landing page or whip up some marketing collateral and then have the sales conversations. And I think the beauty of having someone that way, obviously they can pinch it in different areas, but you're almost
Mm,
hedging your bet because then if something pops off, like you're like, oh gosh, we're generating a lot of inbound here just by virtue of all our whatever we're doing. Okay, now let's focus on our CRO and our demand generation and trying to amplify that. Whereas if it requires a lot of complex hand-to-hand sales, maybe we need more technical subject matter experts from the domain we're in to sort of get there. And I think what a hiring ahead of growth does is enable you to get closer to an educated choice in what those decisions are. A mistake I see all the time is
right.
someone committing to a particular discipline or area too early when there isn't enough traction or sales or revenue to justify the cost of a specialist resource. Like a few classic examples, committing to a Salesforce thing too early, HubSpot, and the latest flavor of the month,
Right.
Clay. Like Clay is expensive. You don't need to buy
Yeah.
Clay any earlier. Hold off. There's other ways to do it until you get there. Yeah.
That's a great point. We hear that a lot as a question when we're working with our companies. So either it's like we bought the CRM really early, should we change CRM? Because that's like a whole exercise that you don't need to do. And yeah, second, like these tools which are becoming broader, they started narrow, becoming broader, but they're very expensive, right? And you probably that won't do it all either. You'll need to stitch that together with two other tools to really get the effectiveness out of it. And I think it's quite easy sometimes to read those tools and go, I need that tool, right? They're telling me I need that tool. They're everywhere. They have a great marketing budget. They're everywhere. And you're like, why is everyone talking about Clay? I must need it. That's great advice, though. I mean, to go in and say, maybe you'll need it, but you need to prove yourself first. And here's a bunch of other tools you could use a fraction of the price, right?
Yeah, 100%. And probably the only other thing I'd add to this is, a fractional stretches that runway even more depending on where you're at in your journey. And you can get a fractional head of growth
Yeah.
to do these things really sort of more cost effectively until you get more information about the market you're in. Yeah.
Yeah. That's great. So, look, you're our first Australia interview. With my personal and professional connections in Australia, it's a pleasure to get back into it. Really, all the way from Europe, and having you on, Luke, has been awesome. Last kind of note on, like you mentioned earlier, 10 to 12 years ago when you started out that startup journey, the ecosystem was very different than it is today in Australia. Maybe just give me, for everyone who's maybe not been down there or isn't keeping up with Australian tech scene, like paint us a short picture of like what is it like now?
Yeah, I think it's really fun. I think there's probably 3 or 4 city hubs across Australia. You know, Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, and even Perth and Adelaide. And you got sort of the noisy VCs. You got these community builders, the bootstrappers, and then there's this small cohort of, bless them, like they're people that run events all day, every day. You know, one founder took me out. She does like 80 or 100 events a year, and it's just incredible. And I think there's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears and pride that comes in being part of a smaller country and being able to do these things. And I love it. And I think, you know, the help first and sort of, you know, we're in the trenches trying to figure out this hard stuff together is definitely there. And I think if you are ever down in this part of the world, definitely just reach out and connect to some people. Like they'll be more than happy to help. We get the occasional scouting tour requests, but there's always room for more because, you know, from my days at Facebook, Australia's like a small testing pot and you can get away with testing things and how things go in a mature
Yep.
market for a fraction of the price that you would in, say, you know, UK, US, or elsewhere.
Yep. 100%. 100%. Great stuff, Luke. Thank you very much. Really appreciate you spending time with GTM Expertise, sharing your knowledge. And, we wish you well, and I'm sure we'll chat again soon.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks, Ben.
Thanks, Luke.